Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going somewhere that most history channels will not go. Not because the evidence does not exist, but because the evidence makes a lot of people deeply uncomfortable. Today's question is this. Did ancient Chinese explorers reach North America thousands of years before Columbus, before the Vikings, before anyone in the Western world was supposed to have known this continent existed? I want to be clear before we begin. I am not here to sell you a conspiracy theory. I am not going to cherry-pick evidence and ignore the holes. What I am going to do is walk you through every piece of evidence, the compelling, the contested, and the outright disputed, and let you decide what to make of it. Because here is what I know after spending serious time with this question. The story of who first reached the Americas is far more complicated, far older, and far more fascinating than anything you were taught in school. And some of the most exciting discoveries in modern genetics and archaeology are quietly rewriting it right now. Let's get into it. Act 1. The question that will not go away. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We all know the line. We learned it before we learned long division. Columbus arrived, Europe discovered the Americas, and history began. Except that is not what happened. Not even close. We know with absolute certainty that the Norse reached North America around 1000 AD, 5 centuries before Columbus. This site at Lonceau Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, confirms it. Timber-framed buildings, iron boat rivets, a spindle whirl, undeniably Norse, undeniably pre-Columbian. For decades, the idea of Norse contact with North America was dismissed as Viking mythology. Then the archaeology proved it was real. We know with absolute certainty that Polynesian sailors reached South America before Europeans did. The evidence is written in DNA, human DNA, chicken DNA, and the genetic signature of the sweet potato. A 2020 study published in the journal Nature analyzed genetic data from over 800 individuals across 17 Polynesian islands and 15 indigenous groups from Mexico to Chile. It found identical segments of Native American ancestry woven into Polynesian DNA, a single shared contact event that the researchers traced back to approximately 1150 AD, 500 years before Columbus. The Polynesians had been to the Americas and come back. They had brought sweet potatoes with them, a crop that became a staple of Pacific Island life. They may have brought people. If the Norse got here and we were wrong about that for centuries, and the Polynesians got here and we were wrong about that for decades, the question a curious historian has to ask is, who else got here that we do not yet know about? That is the question at the center of today's story. Act 2. The writing on the rocks. It started with a walk. In 2013, a retired American educator named John Ruskamp Jr. was walking through Albuquerque's Petroglyph National Monument in New Mexico, a site covered in thousands of rock carvings left by indigenous peoples over many centuries, when something caught his eye. High above the walking path, cut into a volcanic rock face, were a series of symbols that looked different from the others. Not different in an obvious dramatic way, different in a way that nagged at him, a way that would not let him move on. Ruskamp was not just a casual hiker. He had 3 relevant skills that made him an unusual observer. He was a trained analytical chemist with experience evaluating evidence rigorously. He had a background in statistics, and he had spent years studying both Native American rock writing and ancient Chinese scripts as a personal passion. He had the eyes to see what he was looking at. What he saw on that rock face looked to him like oracle bone script, one of the oldest and most archaic forms of Chinese writing, dating back to the Shang Dynasty, roughly 1600 to 1050 BC, a writing system so old that it had been lost to human memory for approximately 2,500 years, a writing system that to this day only a tiny number of specialists worldwide can read. He photographed the symbols. He went home. He did the work. Over the following years, Ruskamp identified over 84 petroglyphs at sites across the American Southwest, not just in New Mexico, but in Arizona, Utah, Nevada, California, Oklahoma, and even Ontario in Canada, that he believed matched specific oracle bone script characters, not vaguely similar shapes, specific identifiable characters with specific translatable meanings. He did not announce this alone. He brought in experts. David Keatley, a MacArthur Foundation Genius Award recipient and widely considered the leading American analyst of early Chinese oracle bone writings, examined the petroglyphs. He confirmed that a glyph found on a private ranch in Arizona, miles from any public road, matched Chinese oracle bone writings from the Shang Dynasty. He translated it. 3 Arizona cartouche petroglyphs together read, "Set apart for 10 years together, declaring to return, the journey completed to the house of the sun, the journey completed together." Sit with that for a moment, because what that translation describes, if genuine, is not random scratching. It is a travel record. It is someone marking a journey, someone leaving a message that they had been here, that they had been separated from home for 10 years, that they were completing their journey, that they were going back. Professor Ma Baochun of Capital Normal University in Beijing examined the Arizona glyphs and stated that the form and structure are close to oracle bones and could be pre-Qin dynasty characters, meaning older than 221 BC. Professor Song Zhenhao of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences reviewed Ruskamp's broader work and wrote that the petroglyphs present clearly identifiable ancient Chinese messages written long ago in the rock art record, uncategorized and overlooked by modern anthropologists largely because knowledge of ancient styles of Chinese writing is not generally well known, and because the sites are in difficult and remote locations. To summarize what these experts are saying, the marks were not recognized for what they were because almost nobody alive today knows what oracle bone script looks like in the wild. The script died before most of human civilization had the literacy to record it. Act 3. The deeper history. This is not a new idea. Before we go further, let me give you the wider context. Because the idea of ancient Chinese contact with the Americas did not begin with Ruskamp. It has a history that stretches back over 1,000 years. In the 5th century AD, a Chinese Buddhist monk named Hu Shen returned from a long voyage and described a distant land he called Fusang, a place far to the east, across an enormous ocean, a land with trees that bore remarkable fruit, with people who had unfamiliar customs, with a social structure that the Chinese records describe in curious detail. Hu Shen said it took him 20,000 elo, roughly 10,000 kilometers, to reach it from the Chinese coast. Scholars have debated Fusang for centuries. Some believe it was Japan, some believe it was the Kamchatka Peninsula, but a persistent and serious thread of scholarship, including work published in respected academic journals, has argued that Fusang matches descriptions of the Pacific coast of Mexico or Central America in ways that Japan and Kamchatka simply do not. The trees described match the agave plant. The social customs described match certain Mesoamerican cultures. The distance and direction are roughly consistent. Nobody has proven Fusang was America. Nobody has proven it was not. Then there is the broader question of Chinese maritime capability. The Chinese were among the most sophisticated sailors in the ancient world. By the time of the Han Dynasty, contemporary with the Rome we discussed in a previous episode, Chinese ships were navigating the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean with a sophistication that matched or exceeded anything the Mediterranean world was producing. By the time of the Tang and Song dynasties, Chinese vessels were among the largest and most technically advanced ships on Earth, and by the early 1400s, decades before Columbus, Admiral Zheng He commanded a fleet of ships so enormous that Columbus's entire flotilla could have fit on the deck of a single Chinese treasure ship. We know for certain that Chinese sailors had the technological capability to cross vast open ocean. The question is not whether they could have done it. The question is whether they did. Act 4. The DN. A revolution. Here is where the story takes on a new dimension entirely, because in the last decade, modern genetics has entered this debate, and the results are genuinely startling. In 2023, a landmark study published in the journal Cell Reports used mitochondrial DNA to trace a specific female genetic lineage from northern coastal China to the Americas. The researchers, from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, scoured over 100,000 contemporary and 15,000 ancient DNA samples from across Eurasia. They found evidence of at least 2 distinct migration events from northern coastal China to the Americas, the first during the last ice age, the second during the subsequent warming period, as glaciers retreated and coastal routes became navigable. Crucially, they also found that around the same time as the second migration, another branch of the same genetic lineage moved to Japan, which may explain why archaeologists have long noted striking similarities between certain Paleolithic tools and artifacts found in the Americas, in China, and in Japan. The same hands, making the same things, in places that are supposed to have had no contact, One of the study's authors told reporters directly, "Our findings indicate that besides the previously indicated ancestral sources of Native Americans in Siberia, northern coastal China also served as a genetic reservoir contributing to the gene pool." This is a peer-reviewed study, published in a major scientific journal, based on analysis of over 100,000 genetic samples. This is not fringe research. This is mainstream science quietly rewriting the story of how the Americas were first populated. And it does not stop there. A separate body of research has been building a case from a completely different angle, the Pacific trade networks. We know from confirmed evidence that the Polynesians reached South America around 1150 AD. We know this from human DNA, showing a mixed Polynesian South American ancestry appearing in Pacific Island populations at that date. We know this from the sweet potato, a South American crop that was already a staple of Pacific Island life when the first European explorers arrived. We know this from the bottle gourd, another American plant found in Polynesia with American genetic markers predating European contact. The Pacific was not an empty barrier. It was a highway, and people were using it long before European history acknowledges. Now, and this is the crucial connection, if Polynesian sailors were reaching South America by around 1150 AD, and if Polynesian culture itself traces its origins back to Southeast Asia, and ultimately to ancient coastal populations connected to China, then the trans-Pacific movement of people, plants, animals, and potentially ideas is not a theory. It is an established pattern. The only question is how far back it goes, and how many distinct cultures were involved. Act 5, the skeptics, and why they deserve to be heard. I promised you at the beginning of this video that I would be fair in both directions. So let us talk honestly about why mainstream archaeology has not embraced these findings. The core objection to Roskamp's petroglyphs is the problem of pattern recognition. Human beings are spectacularly good at finding familiar shapes in random noise. We see faces in clouds. We see animals in rock formations. We see meaning in coincidence. Oracle bone script is composed of relatively simple pictographic strokes. Lines, curves, dots, angles. The concern among critics is that if you examine thousands of rock carvings made by dozens of cultures over thousands of years, and you are actively looking for shapes that match a specific ancient writing system, you will find matches. The statistical question, are these matches meaningful or are they what you would expect by random chance, is genuinely difficult to answer, and Roskamp's critics argue he has not answered it to a sufficient standard. The Society for American Archaeology has dismissed the petroglyphs. The mainstream archaeological establishment in the United States has largely declined to engage seriously with the claims. That institutional resistance matters. These are professionals who have spent careers studying rock art, ancient scripts, and pre-Columbian contact. Their skepticism is not ignorance. It is the product of having seen many exciting claims fail to hold up under scrutiny. There is also the absence of what archaeologists call associated context. Petroglyphs alone, without accompanying artifacts that can be independently dated and linked to a specific culture, remain ambiguous. The dream find would be an undisturbed site containing Chinese objects, pottery, bronze tools, written materials, in a stratified archaeological layer that can be definitively dated to before European contact. That find has not been made, and there is the question of mechanism. How exactly did Shang Dynasty sailors, operating in 1300 BC, cross the Pacific? The Pacific is not the Atlantic. The Atlantic is roughly 5,000 kilometers wide at its narrowest. The Pacific, from China to the California coast, is over 8,000 kilometers of open ocean, with no islands to stop at for most of the journey. The Polynesians crossed it, but they spent generations developing the navigational technology to do so, island hopping across the Pacific over centuries before reaching the Americas. Did Bronze Age Chinese sailors have the same capability? The evidence for that level of open ocean sailing from China at that date simply does not exist. Yet, Act 6, the bigger picture. So where does this leave us? Let me pull the threads together and tell you what I actually think, as a historian who tries to follow evidence rather than either enthusiasm or institutional skepticism. The DNA evidence is real, peer-reviewed, and significant. We now know that people from northern coastal China contributed to the genetic ancestry of the first Americans, though this likely happened tens of thousands of years ago, along Ice Age coastal routes, not as a deliberate Bronze Age expedition. The ancient Pacific was far more connected than we assumed. That is settled. The Polynesian contact with the Americas around 1150 AD is confirmed. That is settled too. The sweet potato, the bottle gourd, the human DNA, they all point the same direction. The Ruskamp petroglyphs are genuinely intriguing and insufficiently explained. The involvement of serious scholars like Keatley adds weight that cannot be simply dismissed, but the absence of corroborating physical evidence means they remain exactly that, intriguing and insufficiently explained. They are a hypothesis, not a conclusion, a direction for investigation, not an answer. And the broader theory, that ancient Chinese sailors deliberately crossed the Pacific and left writing on rocks in New Mexico 3,000 years ago, remains unproven. Not disproven, unproven. There is a significant difference. Here is what I know for certain as a historian. The story of human movement across this planet is consistently more complex, more ancient, and more connected than any previous generation has understood. Every decade, new evidence pushes back the dates, extends the distances, and reveals connections that were previously thought impossible. The Norse were mythology until they weren't. Polynesian contact with the Americas was speculation until the DNA confirmed it. The Amazonian civilizations were ghost stories until LIDAR found their cities under the jungle canopy. The history of archaeology is a history of being wrong about what was impossible. I am not saying ancient Chinese explorers definitely carved oracle bone script into rocks in New Mexico 3,000 years ago. I am saying that the evidence deserves serious investigation, that the people doing that investigation are not cranks. Some of them are MacArthur Genius Award winners and professors at China's most prestigious universities, and that the question of who first explored the Americas, how, and when, is one of the most wide-open and genuinely exciting unsolved problems in all of human history. The closing. Here is the thought I want to leave you with. We live in an age when we think we know most of human history. We have the internet, we have satellites, we have DNA sequencing machines that can read the genetic code of a person who died 20,000 years ago. We feel like the big questions have been answered. And then someone goes for a walk in Albuquerque and finds ancient Chinese writing on a rock face, and suddenly the whole story is open again. The ancient world was not a collection of isolated civilizations sitting in separate rooms, unaware of each other. We have already proven that with Rome and China connected by the Silk Road across thousands of miles. We have proven it with the Polynesians, navigating the largest ocean on Earth without instruments, reaching a continent that the rest of the world would not find for another 300 years. We have proven it with the genetics of the first Americans, whose ancestry traces back to the coastlines of ancient China. The ancient world was connected. The question is not whether people crossed the Pacific. People crossed the Pacific. The question is who, when, and how many times. And the rocks in New Mexico are waiting for someone to give them a better answer than we have managed so far. If this opened something for you, leave a comment, tell me what you think. Because on this one, I genuinely want to know where you land. And subscribe and stay with us, because this is one of those stories we will be coming back to as new evidence emerges. The science is moving fast, history is being rewritten, and we intend to be here when it happens.